The silence in my car felt like a physical weight. I'd been parked outside the Whaley House for hours, wrestling with what I'd experienced in that room. The peace Ainsworth offered lingered in my mind like nicotine, toxic but addictive. This time, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked wrong, as if someone else wore my face. My hand trembled as I lit another cigarette. The flame revealed dark circles under my eyes that seemed deeper than usual. I hadn't slept since when? The days had begun to blur, time dissolving like sugar in bitter coffee. "This ends tonight," I muttered to no one. The house loomed before me, its Victorian architecture a dark cutout against the star-scattered sky. Yellow light spilled from Matthew's office window. He was working late again. Perfect. I killed the engine and moved through shadows toward the back entrance. The lock surrendered to my picks with an almost apologetic click. Inside, the familiar musty air wrapped around me like a shroud. My flashlight beam carved through darkness as I ascended the service stairs. Each step caused ancient wood to protest beneath my feet. I paused at each creak, listening for movement. Nothing but the house's usual symphony of settling timber and whispering drafts. Matthew's office door stood slightly ajar, spilling a wedge of light into the hallway. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear voices. Silence. Easing forward, I peered through the gap. Empty. I slipped inside his office, shrouded by darkness, my flashlight piercing dusty corners and forgotten filing cabinets. The beam came to rest on a bookshelf, its polished mahogany out of place amid the neglected decay. With a shove, it groaned and shifted, revealing a hidden door behind. Rusted hinges protested as I pried it open, the air heavy with stale secrets and unspoken truths. Inside, a metal lockbox gleamed dully, the last guardian of forbidden knowledge. My lockpick made quick work of it. The papers inside were old, their edges brittle and yellowed, but the scrawling script danced before my eyes like specters from the past. Letters, all in code, a complex dance of symbols and ciphers. But there, woven between the cryptic lines, two familiar hands, the elegant loops of Olivia's penmanship entwined with the sharp angles of Matthew's script. Two serpents forming an unholy union. I sank into the nearest chair, the weight of realization pressing down like a physical force. The beam of my flashlight wavered as I deciphered their twisted correspondence, each revelation a fresh blow. The disappearance was flawless, believed by all. Now we may proceed to the final phase. Olivia's words, cold and calculating. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. Olivia, the victim I'd fought so desperately to save, was no victim at all. She was a willing participant, a co-conspirator in this web of deceit and control. More letters unveiled the sickening truth in stark relief. Olivia had sought out Matthew after learning of Ainsworth's experiments. She saw mind control not as a violation, but as a solution, a twisted salve for the violence that had claimed her brother. My hands shook so badly, the papers nearly slipped from my grasp. A sudden noise from the hall froze me in place, heart pounding against my ribs like a caged beast. Footsteps, measured and unhurried, approached the door. I doused the light, melting into the shadows, hand instinctively reaching for the comforting weight of my gun. But the footsteps passed, fading into the distance, and I let out a shuddering breath. I had to move, had to uncover the full extent of their plans before it was too late. I crept from the office, senses straining against the oppressive silence. The corridors of the Whaley House stretched before me, a labyrinth of secrets and forgotten horrors. I followed the hum of electricity, the walls thrumming with hidden conduits and veiled intentions. The wires led me down into the bowels of the house, to a door that shouldn't exist. Muffled voices seeped through the cracks, Matthew's hushed tones mingling with the buzz of machinery. Ainsworth's legacy will finally be fulfilled, he murmured, reverence and madness coloring his words. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear, to understand. Technical jargon floated through the air, talk of neural interfaces and frequency modulation. They were building something to carry on Ainsworth's twisted work. I had to see, had to know. I slipped away, retracing my steps through the silent house. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back, of shadows shifting just beyond the periphery of my vision. Ainsworth's presence hung thick in the air, a miasma of madness and control. Dawn found me huddled in my room at the Grand Malcolm, surrounded by a chaos of notes and diagrams, the detritus of a mind unraveling. Jim's voice crackled through the phone, laced with concern and frustration. "You're not thinking straight, Morgan. This talk of mind control. You sound like a madman." His words hit like physical blows, echoing the doubts swirling in my own mind. I looked around at the walls, every surface covered in scrawled theories and disconnected thoughts, a physical manifestation of my fracturing psyche. Maybe Jim was right. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality. But then I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment, it wasn't my face staring back at me. It was Ainsworth, lips curled in a knowing smile, eyes glinting with cruel amusement. I blinked, and the illusion shattered, leaving only my own haggard visage. "You don't understand, Jim," I said, my voice rough with exhaustion and desperation. "It's not just theories. It's real. Olivia, she's not a victim. She's helping them." Silence hung heavy on the line, broken only by Jim's slow exhalation. "Morgan, listen to me. You need help. Real help. This case, it's consuming you. Please, before you do something you can't take back." I cut the call, his pleas fading into static. He couldn't see, couldn't understand the truth that danced just beyond the veil of normalcy. But I could. I had to. The streets passed in a blur as I walked, no destination in mind, just a need to move, to escape the walls that closed in around me. My feet carried me to the refuge, the dingy bar that had become my sanctuary and my prison. I hunched over my usual table, nursing a whiskey I couldn't taste, eyes straining over old blueprints of the Whaley House. There had to be a way in, a path to the truth they sought to bury. My fingers traced possible routes, shaking slightly as I sketched out my plan. In the amber depths of my untouched drink, Ainsworth's face rippled and shifted, that damnable smile never wavering. He was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for me to falter, to succumb. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. For every victim whose mind they'd violated, for every truth they'd tried to erase, I would fight, even if it cost me everything. Night fell, cloaking the city in shadows that whispered and writhed. In a rented warehouse, far from prying eyes, I laid out my tools with ritualistic precision. Camera, recorder, lockpicks, each one a talisman against the unknown. And then there was the gun, cold steel, heavy in my hand. I'd always avoided them, relying on my wits and my words to navigate the treacherous waters of my profession. But now, faced with an enemy that could twist reality itself, the weight was a comfort, an anchor in the storm. On the wall, a web of photographs and red string mapped out the tangled threads of the conspiracy, the players and pawns in Ainsworth's macabre game. At the center, a question mark, a blank space, waiting to be filled by the final piece of the puzzle. My phone buzzed, Jim's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, his worried voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm begging you, Morgan, don't do this. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth it. You're chasing ghosts, and they'll only lead you to ruin." But he was wrong. The ghosts were real, and they'd already found me. The only choice left was to confront them head-on, to stare into the abyss and pray it didn't stare back. The Whaley House loomed before me, a sleeping beast waiting to be awakened. I watched from the shadows as the last of the technicians filed out, leaving only Matthew and his inner circle. Through a basement window, I glimpsed flashes of light, heard the hum of machines spinning to life. The stage was set, the players assembled. All that remained was for me to take my place, to step into the spotlight and face the truth, no matter how blinding. My phone vibrated again, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer, to press the cold plastic to my ear and listen. "You can't save them all, Morgan." The voice was familiar, achingly so, but distant, as if speaking from a dream. Some truths are meant to stay buried. "Olivia?" I breathed, hardly daring to hope. But the line went dead, leaving only questions and the bitter sting of betrayal. I turned back to the house, to the waiting darkness that called to me like a siren song. In the window, a shadow moved, a figure in a lab coat, watching me with eyes that glinted like stars in the night. Ainsworth, or just another trick of the light? I couldn't be sure anymore. The lines between reality and nightmare had blurred, bleeding together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But one thing was crystal clear. Inside that house, the answers waited, the final pieces of the puzzle that would make everything make a terrible, perfect sense. And I would find them, even if I had to tear the place down brick by brick, even if I had to face the devil himself in the depths of hell. With a last, steadying breath, I stepped out of the shadows and into the maw of the beast, ready to meet my fate, whatever it might be. The stairs groan beneath my feet as I descend into the bowels of Whaley House. Muted echoes of machines thrumming below grow louder with each step, the hot, stale air thickening like tar in my lungs. My flashlight casts eerie shadows that dance across the crumbling stone walls, illuminating drag marks gouged into the grime, unmistakable signs of heavy equipment being hauled through recently. The tremor in my right hand worsens, my fingers spasming of their own accord. I tighten my grip on my gun until my knuckles blanch white. A muffled scream pierces the drone of machinery as I reach the bottom of the stairs. It emanates from behind a rusted metal door, hanging slightly ajar at the end of the dank corridor. An unnatural blue glow spills out from the gap. I inch closer, peering through the opening to see banks of monitors flashing with undecipherable data and a chair bolted to the center of the room. A figure is strapped into it, head engulfed by a metal halo, bristling with electrodes and wires. I shoulder through the door, weapon raised, fluorescent lights assaulting my eyes as they adjust to the sudden brightness. I stumble to an abrupt halt, breath catching in my throat at the impossible scene before me. It's not some anonymous victim shackled to that grotesque contraption. It's Olivia Radcliffe, and she's smiling. "Morgan," she says, her voice preternaturally serene. Wires coil around her like cybernetic snakes. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about control. It's about salvation. The monitors paint her face in strobing blues and whites, casting ghoulish shadows. Patterns of synchronized brain activity undulate across the screens. Dozens of them, all pulsing in perfect unison. Bile rises in my throat. What the hell is this? I manage through gritted teeth, gun wavering between Olivia and the hulking machines. Matthew Wells glides out from behind the central console, movements calculated and deliberate. He regards me with an unsettling mix of pity and satisfaction, like a teacher about to enlighten a particularly slow student. She came to me, Morgan. After she lost her brother to the violence plaguing our streets, she finally saw the truth. This world is chaos. It needs order. It needs peace. His fingers dance across the controls, and the machines whir louder, a rising note of dreadful anticipation. Olivia rises from the chair in one fluid motion, cables still tethering her to the monstrosity. "You've lost someone too," she says, eyes boring into mine with zealous intensity. "Your daughter." Imagine how many more children we could save from that fate, how much tragedy we could prevent. It's a blade to the heart, expertly wielded. I see my little girl's face, forever frozen at 8 years old, vibrant and innocent. The trembling in my hand intensifies. "Morgan, you know the pain of a senseless loss," Matthew presses on, a serpent seducing me with half-truths. Olivia's brother died at the hands of an addict, a man in the grips of an impulse he couldn't control. But with this, we can eliminate those destructive urges at the source, engineer a better world from the inside out. Unbidden, visions of a world without violence, without suffering, flicker through my mind. A siren song of false utopia, sweet and cloying. The voice of Dr. Ainsworth, the monster behind this madness, slithers through my thoughts. See what we could build together. The gun trembles violently in my grip, caught between Olivia's rapturous face and the bank of unholy machinery. My own reflection warps in the chrome, twisting into a phantasm of the man I used to be. The grieving father, the shattered husband, the cop who couldn't save the one who mattered most. I look at Olivia, seeing my own despair mirrored back. How many lives had violence shattered? How many futures had cruelty stolen? The temptation to end that cycle, to spare others from our suffering, gnaws at me with rat-like teeth. "It's time for the final synchronization," Matthew announces triumphantly, hands poised over a large red switch. On the monitors, dozens of brainwave patterns surge towards a terminal convergence. I feel my own mind straining towards that terrible harmony, an inexorable pull to lose myself in that manufactured peace. "It's not too late," Olivia pleads, eyes raw and desperate. "Join us, Morgan. Let us heal your pain." And for a fleeting, traitorous moment, I want to. I see my daughter's face merge with the pixelated chorus of stolen minds, happy, whole, untouchable, reunited in a world without end, without fear. A world where no one has to feel this yawning emptiness ever again. My fingers loosen their white-knuckle grip on the gun. I waver. The room tilts. Olivia's face becomes a cipher, shifting between the eager, young journalist I remember and some alien presence wearing her skin. Ainsworth's malignant essence bleeds through, promising oblivion, promising release. But then, like a life raft in a churning sea, my last anchor to sanity emerges from memory. A sun-dappled day at the park, my daughter's raven hair whipping behind her as she races towards the swings. I stand behind her, pushing her higher into a bluebird sky. Her delighted laughter rings out, bright and fierce, with the unfettered joy of being alive in a world of wonders and possibility. That shimmering recollection flexes atrophied muscles of resistance, of defiance, and I finally see this poisoned fantasy for what it is. Not salvation, but damnation. A lobotomized existence, all that makes us human carved away until only smiling automatons remain. The ultimate perversion of my daughter's memory. I will not let them hollow out her legacy. I will not surrender to this numb subjugation, even if it damns me, even if I have to walk through hell alone. My arm snaps up, suddenly steady. I change aim at the last second and squeeze the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. Sparks erupt from the control console in a shower of burning shrapnel and acrid smoke. Olivia collapses like a marionette with cut strings, a strangled sob escaping her throat. Matthew howls in rage and dismay, throwing himself at the spitting, smoking machinery in a vain attempt to salvage his crumbling empire of the mind. Alarms blare as I surge forward, ripping electrodes from Olivia's slack face. The smell of burning wires and scorched metal chokes the air. I gather her convulsing body in my arms, forced to watch helplessly as her eyes roll back in her skull, trapped in the throes of a seizure. Or perhaps the brutal snap of a hijacked mind rebelling against its loss of chains. On the few monitors still functioning, I glimpse the captive patterns of neural activity unraveling, lurching back towards organic chaos. Minds untethered from the monstrous override, lost and disoriented, but free, yet not without cost. Olivia's readout is a cataclysm of arrhythmic spikes and jagged canyons, a once vibrant landscape flash-fried to ruin. Fragments of self, scattered to incoherent dust. I search her slack, empty face for any flicker of the determined woman I met mere weeks ago, the journalist fiercely committed to exposing the truth. But there is nothing. Only the blank stare of a shattered husk, a cracked and leaking vessel drained of its vital spark. Rage and grief war within me, hurling recriminations with savage glee. If only I had been faster, smarter, better. If only I had seen through Matthew's concerned veneer and Olivia's sham obsession with the story. If only, but the time for if-onlys is long past. The alarm klaxons taken on a muted quality, as if heard from underwater. Smoke hazes the air, embers of ruined equipment winking like stars in a dying galaxy. Matthew's hunched shoulders quake with impotent sobs over his failed life's work. I heft Olivia's limp weight and make for the door, each leaden step an agony of spent adrenaline and creeping despair. The temptation to succumb to that hollow salvation still laps at the edges of my mind, promising an end to this endlessly uphill battle against an implacable universe that seems determined to strip away all that I love, all that gives my existence meaning. But I won't. I can't. Because in those brief, shining moments with my daughter, in a world not yet entirely drained of wonder, I touched something more luminous than any siren song of easy peace. I held the indelible truth of the unquenchable human spirit, striving and seeking and daring to exist in defiance of all that would snuff it out. And so I carry on, one foot in front of the other, bearing Olivia out of this modern-day bedlam and into the uncertain night, towards an uncaring world still worth fighting for, still worth bleeding for, because the alternative is to let the Matthew Wells and the Ainsworths of this world win, to let their perversion of salvation metastasize until it corrupts all that makes this blood-soaked and star-crossed existence worth living. I emerge into cool, clean air, sucking in grateful lungfuls to banish the cordite and char. I glance down at Olivia's pale, empty face, a roadmap of my own failures, but also, perhaps, a reminder of why I cannot stop, why I will not stop, until every shadow is illuminated, every twisted secret dragged, shrieking into the light, until the only minds violated are those of the violators themselves. Distant sirens wailed, growing louder with each passing second. I glanced down at my right hand, noticing with grim satisfaction that the tremor was nearly imperceptible now. The bitter taste of this Pyrrhic victory seemed to have frozen even my inner demons, at least for the moment. I carried Olivia out through the back door of the Whaley's house, gently laying her on the overgrown grass as the first responders arrived in a cacophony of flashing lights and barked orders. The EMTs swarmed around Olivia, their movements efficient and clinical. I watched as they transferred her to a gurney, her blank eyes staring sightlessly up at the lightening sky. Matthew Wells was led past in handcuffs, his posture straight and oddly dignified despite the circumstances. He paused next to me, his voice calm and full of unshakable conviction. "You've stopped nothing, Mr. Graves. All you've done is ensure more suffering. Dr. Ainsworth's dream was the only solution." His words were cut off as the officers shoved him unceremoniously into the back of a squad car. I caught a glimpse of Richard Green observing the scene from his sleek black sedan. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a slight nod. It wasn't gratitude I saw in his expression, but a weary understanding of the burden that comes with making certain choices. The car merged smoothly into traffic and vanished from sight, no doubt off to bury this whole sordid affair under miles of red tape and classified stamps. Later, at the psychiatric hospital, I stood outside the reinforced glass of the high-security wing, watching Olivia as she sat unmoving in the sterile white room. She was sketching, her hand moving with manic intensity over the paper, creating dizzying patterns that bore an unsettling resemblance to Ainsworth's diagrams. "She cycles through 5 or 6 distinct personalities," the nurse explained, her voice tinged with both pity and unease. "Some of them, well, they don't seem to be hers at all." Dr. Helen Sorensen found me in the corridor, her face drawn and exhausted. "You saved her from Ainsworth's influence," she said quietly, "but the cost was her own mind. Sometimes, severing a forced connection can be more damaging than maintaining it." Her words settled in my gut like lead, the implications too heavy to contemplate. I retreated to the refuge, my familiar corner of the dingy bar, a welcome respite from the chaos of the last few days. An untouched glass of whiskey sat in front of me, the amber liquid gleaming dully in the low light. My phone buzzed, Jim, no doubt checking in. With a sigh, I answered. "Did I save her or destroy her, Jim?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow, even to my own ears. What right did I have to choose between her artificial peace and her actual torment? "Sometimes there are no right choices, Morgan," Jim replied, his voice steady and sympathetic. "Only necessary ones." I glanced down at my right hand, the tremor already starting to return, an unwelcome old friend. That night, I lay awake in my decrepit room at the Grand Malcolm, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The peeling wallpaper seemed to form faces in the gloom, echoes of the minds I had supposedly freed, or perhaps just manifestations of my own guilt. I pulled myself out of bed, dog limping over to lean comfortingly against my leg. The latest case file sat on my battered desk, the final report still unwritten. I flipped it open, pen hovering over the blank page. "We saved their minds," I wrote, the words bitter on my tongue. But at what cost? Ainsworth offered peace, through control. I gave them freedom through chaos. In the end, who was right? I closed the file, the question hanging heavy in the musty air. I knew it would haunt me for the rest of my days, however many I had left. But then again, I was used to living with ghosts. The rain pelted against the grimy windows of room 237 at the Grand Malcolm Hotel as I sat slumped in my worn leather chair, the antique tape recorder whirring on the table before me. Olivia's voice filled the room, a ghostly echo from the past. The human mind is a battlefield. I took a swig of whiskey, watching the rivulets of raindrops distorting the city lights outside. The shrill ring of the phone shattered Olivia's recorded monologue. I snatched up the receiver. A distorted voice, almost synthetic, rasped in my ear. "His work continues, Mr. Graves. The peace he offered, some still seek it." The line went dead before I could respond. The tremor in my right hand returned with a vengeance. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face. In the fogged mirror, a silhouette in a white lab coat seemed to move in the shadows behind me. I whirled around, nothing but darkness. "Just fatigue," I muttered, but my hand shook violently as I reached for the towel. Back in the chair, I surveyed my case notes scattered across the desk. Diagrams and equations I didn't remember writing still covered sections of the walls. Dog limped over and rested his head on my knee with a soft whine, as if sensing something I couldn't see. The phone rang again, a different voice this time, crisp and professional. "Mr. Graves, we have a case that may interest you. Something inexplicable." Staring at my fractured reflection in the window, I noticed my smile didn't quite seem to belong to me. "Send the details by email," I replied, my voice gravelly. I clicked off the recorder, Olivia's voice fading into silence. As I filed away the tapes, my fingers brushed a scrap of paper, one of her final notes. "The true prison is believing we are free." I stared at the words, their meaning now carrying a different weight. Dawn seeped through the rain-streaked window, casting an eerie glow. I sank into the chair. Dog curled loyally at my side. My hand trembled slightly as I stroked his fur. In the window's reflection, for a fleeting moment, my face seemed to overlap with Ainsworth's. Or perhaps it was just a trick of the early morning light filtered through the rain. The spectre of Edwin Ainsworth still haunted me, his fragmented consciousness lurking in the shadows of my mind. I had stopped his grand plan, shattered the neural network he had so meticulously constructed. But at what cost? Olivia's sanity, fractured beyond repair. The minds of his victims, scarred by the abrupt severance of their forced connection. My own psyche, forever tainted by the seductive whisper of his vision. I glanced at the crumpled letter on my desk, a final missive from Helen Sorensen. Ainsworth's work was just the beginning, she had written. There are others who share his dream. The evolution of the human mind cannot be stopped, only delayed. The words seemed to writhe on the page, taunting me. I knew this respite was temporary. The inexplicable still called to me, a siren song I was powerless to resist. More cases would come, each one chipping away at the fragile barrier between reality and madness. I would chase the shadows, delving deeper into the abyss, until one day, I feared, I would no longer be able to find my way back. The rain continued its relentless patter against the window, a staccato symphony of melancholy. I poured another whiskey and turned up the collar of my jacket against the chill that seemed to emanate from within. The game was far from over, and I, Morgan Graves, was still just a pawn on the board, a flawed knight tilting at the windmills of the mind.